We're in conversation with Nandan Nilekani. So thank you so much for joining us on ET Now. So last week, one of India's most awaited reforms, was finally launched. The GST, touted as this mega reform, the most ambitious tax reform. What is your own take on the impact this is likely to have, specifically on the economy and GDP going forward?
Well, I think the GST is a very, very important reform on many levels. Obviously, at the level that we all understand, it makes India into one market and one tax system. So ease of doing business will improve. India becomes a national market. Moving goods across state borders will become simple with checkposts being eliminated. And people will put their supply chain and warehouses where it makes sense, not just to optimize on taxes. So that part is well understood. But I think the other big thing is the rapid use of the most advanced technology in the GSTN, in the GST through the GST Network, GSTN, which is less well understood. And that was something I was involved with 7 years back.
Right. In fact, the president mentioned that.
That's right. So about 7 years back, the president requested me, at that time he was the finance minister of the country, and he very rightfully and very thoughtfully realized that while the tax system is being designed, it's important to have a technology platform in place for that. And they realized that which goods are inside the tax system may vary. You may include alcohol or petroleum or don't include. And also the tax rates may vary. But for a software guy, these are all tables. A table of what is important is the system. How do you register a taxpayer? How do you file returns? How do you pay? How do you do all that? So I think Mr. Mukherjee was very sagacious enough to realize the value of that. So he appointed a committee which I headed, which came out with both the design of the GST system on how it will deal with these returns and taxes, as well as the institutional way of doing it, which was to create a whole new corporation, a non-profit corporation. So it's a utility called the GSTN, where both the state and the center have equal shareholding. Again, that was a very unique idea because this tax had both state component and central component. So each could not deal with the other. So you had to create a new entity where both could sort of come together.
Right.
So the formation of the GSTN as well as the architecture was done by this committee.
I'm just going to come to GST in a bit, but before that I want to, again stress on the macro impact that this is likely to have in terms of, India moving to a formal economy, widening of tax base. People also fear that, it could have a near-term impact on consumption. Do you think these are some of the near-term risks that we have to factor in?
Well, I mean, obviously it will take a few weeks for all this to settle down. And there will be some small perturbation, I'm sure, during that time. But once it settles down, and I don't think it will take too long, it will have significant impact because it will drive economic growth, it will reduce ease of doing business, it will definitely increase taxes. We had estimated at that time itself that it would increase taxes quite a bit, but I think it will be even more now because that is a 7-year-old number. And we feel that compliance is now going to be automatic. You have to be, if you're on GST, you have to comply to get the benefits of GST because of this whole system called Input Tax Credit, ITC. And we think that, at least I think, and I'm sure other people think too, because I'm not really involved with the implementation, is that it will have a significant impact and it will encourage more companies to become part of the formal economy. Because unless you're in the system, you can't get the benefits.
As someone who was, the architect, the initial architect of this GST network, what is your own take on, how prepared the GST network is to handle this volume of transaction? I mean, we spoke to Naveen Kumar last week, this week, and, he seems very confident that they can handle 300 crore invoices a month. But there have also been concerns on the other hand, rumors that, maybe this wasn't tested properly. What is your own sense of how secure the GST network is, how prepared it will be when the actual returns start flowing in sometime in September?
Well, obviously, GSTN has very fine leadership. Mr. Naveen Kumar, the chairman, is a former chief secretary of Bihar and he's also worked in the finance ministry. And Prakash Kumar, the CEO, is also a former IAS officer who left the service, worked in Cisco and Microsoft, and then came back into this service. So they're all deeply experienced people, both in government as well as in technology. So I'm confident that they'll do it. But finally, no matter how well prepared you are, you have to, the actual reality is when it happens. So I'm sure they'll deal with challenges. But the transaction volume is not that high. They're talking about 3 to 5 billion invoices a month. Now, today, it looks a lot, but today, certainly if you look at the private systems in the world, Google's and Facebook's, they handle many more transactions because every interaction is a transaction. And even if you look at the Aadhaar system, today the Aadhaar system is doing 40 million authentications a day. 40 million authentications a day, which means it's doing, and that's what they published on June 30th. On June 30th, they did 40 million. So if you take that on a monthly basis, that's over 1 billion transactions a month just in authentication. So there is obviously a way to design such large systems. So I think, obviously the test will be when it happens, but I'm confident that, again, I'm not close to it because I have not been involved in it for last 3 years.
In fact, we also spoke to Mr. Murthy, Narayan Murthy last week, and he said, in my 50-year experience with computers, there's no project that will not have, some hitch or something for the first 6 months. So would you agree, is that something that we have to factor in?
No, I think that's been factored in. I think the government has done a very thorough job, and both the GSTN as well as the Finance Ministry under Mr. Arun Jaitley. Mr. Hasmukh Adhia is excellent, one of the best officers they have. He's been spearheading this as the Revenue Secretary. So, so there's a very fine team in the Finance Ministry. Arvind Subramaniam is there. So there's a very good team out there. So I'm sure they've done it well. And it just, no, look, as Murthy said, any new technology will always have some, back and forth. But it'll all stabilize.
In terms of how India Inc. itself has looked at GST, right? I mean, everyone has welcomed the reform, but a section of leaders also feel that, it could have been a simple structure. I mean, for example, Kiran Mazumdar-Shaw last week said, this is a transformative reform, but it's complex, and that we should have had a simpler GST. Would you agree with that concern, that perhaps it's a little convoluted with multiple tax slabs, different rules for different sectors? The adjustment period is perhaps going to take very long because of that complexity, that we should have had a simpler GST.
No, my own view is that, yes, I mean, in an ideal world, you need a very simple GST. And if you go back and look at the recommendations of Dr. Kelkar, who's really the person who was the architect of the reforms in multiple reports of his, he wanted a very simple GST, one rate or 2 rates and all that. But what happens is that the actual decision is a complex political negotiation between the center and the state. So then there's obviously going to be, it's not going to be the way that you like it in a perfect world.
In an
utopian
GST.
I don't worry about it that much, because to me, having the technology platform in place where everyone registers as a taxpayer the same way, everybody files returns the same way, everybody pays using the same infrastructure across the country. That is really the strategic issue. Now, if you have 5 rates or 6 rates, for a software guy, it's nothing but a table. And tomorrow, and they had to do that because the biggest concern everybody has is are the revenues going to get affected? Both central government and state governments is an even bigger issue, because VAT is a very significant part of state revenues. I mean, apart from excise duty, the booze stuff, VAT is the biggest. That's also why they kept the booze outside the system. But what I think will happen is, once this is implemented, the value of this sophisticated matching thing, where input tax credit is only given when your supplier files the invoices, essentially makes the entire system depend on the other guy to get the benefit. So if I'm a big company and I've got 5,000 suppliers, I will make sure that my 5,000 suppliers have a GSTN code, and I will make sure that all of them file their returns on time, because my input tax credit depends on that.
So it's in my interest.
Yeah, so that's the interlocking system, which is a very clever part of the design of GST, will improve compliance quite a bit.
But this is the best we could have managed.
This is a very
on
sophisticated system. Okay. I mean, look, as we said, whenever you do it, you're going to have some, obviously you're going to deal with the implementation and short-term challenges. But what's important is that once the states realize that there's a lot more buoyancy because of this compliance, 2 things will happen. One is they'll all start saying, why do we need so many rate slabs? So they'll start broadbanding the rates. So if, suppose the rate today is the A, B, C, D, E, they'll say, because they'll have data, no? They'll say C and D may kuch, there's no farak. So they'll merge C and D. So I think those 5 or 6 rates will ultimately shrink down to 1 or 2. So that will happen. Second thing that will happen is that they will see that the technology matching of GST increases taxes. They'll find that actually keeping some of these things out is not a good idea, because if petroleum and alcohol comes into GST, then they'll get the benefit of that. So both will happen. That is, the rates will come down and every product will come in. So then you have your simple GST.
Right. The other concern from the industry is this anti-profiteering clause, that this could lead to some sort of Inspector Raj, some sort of tax harassment. Does the government really need to do more there to sort of assuage concerns? Because again, when we spoke to Chidambaram on this last week, he said it's completely anti-market, against market forces. So does the government have to do more to really reassure companies in that respect?
Well, I've not really been following this profiteering clause, but certainly I think my bias is always to make things simple, automated, and less scope for discretion.
So, so basically, you're not going to delve into that.
I haven't really studied this whole thing.
Right.
I've really seen it from a tech point of view.
Right. So you spoke about the way GSTN was envisioned, the way it's structured, but that ownership has also lent itself to criticism, because people are now turning around and asking why does the private sector have such a huge ownership interest in GSTN? Why can't they be audited? Why are HDFC Bank and ICICI Bank stakeholders? What would you really say to people with those concerns?
Well, first of all, I think the GSTN architecture and design has withstood 2 governments, 3 finance ministers, and 5 chairmen of empowered committee. Right? So when we started, Mr. Mukherjee was the finance minister, Mr. Asim Dasgupta was the chair of the empowered committee of state finance. That's when the idea was first conceived. Then it carried forward with Mr. Chidambaram as finance minister and Mr. Sushil Modi, deputy, who was the Bihar finance minister and deputy CM. Then Mr. Jaitley came, and on the other side, the head of that empowered committee went to Mr. Mani of Kerala. And then after him, there was a gentleman from J&K. And then for a short time, I think Mani Sasodia was also chairing it. And then Mr. Amit Mitra. So you've seen all of them have looked at it and have basically accepted that this is the best way of doing it. So to me, there's a unanimity on this thing. Now coming to the specific thing, it is owned 24.5% by the central government, 24.5% by the state government. That itself is a unique thing. A partnership, it's a non-profit company. So it's not there to make profits, it's just to provide utility. And the 5 private shareholders, who are all institutions, each owns only some 10%. So it's effectively government, directed company. So I think because the reason for that also was that in technology you need to attract good people. So you need to be able to pay, you have to have flexibility in paying salaries. You need to quickly change direction on technology procurement. So that is also one of the reasons to create the structure the way it was.
In terms of privacy and security,
and we have the same thing with NPCI. NPCI runs India's payment. It's owned collectively by the banks. It's also a non-profit.
In terms of the privacy, security concerns, because it's an open architecture.
What is privacy is how you implement through rules and process. Security is up to the technology architecture to do that. I mean, any complex, large, sophisticated national system has to think through its privacy architecture, has to think through its data security architecture. That's part of your job.
In terms of data itself, so I mean, you've always liked to say that India is moving from a data poor to a data rich nation, and the GST is really symbolic of that, because you're going to get so many indirect taxpayers on the platform. So what can the government do to really leverage that without falling foul of any privacy laws or something, to make more informed decisions about the economy? Because this is a huge mine of data that's going to become available, more people moving to the formal economy. So what impact do you think it could have in that respect?
No, I think this is a very important question, and it's important to realize that GST was conceived as a sort of a big data based project long before the word big data was coined. Because remember that GSTN does not touch the money. It's important to realize that.
It's only an interface.
It's only a data pass through. That is, if I'm a taxpayer, I go to a bank and make the payment. That payment goes to RBI. RBI sees there are two parts. There's a part which central GST that goes to central government, state GST, directly credits the respective state government or the central government. So the money goes to the banking system and RBI directly to the recipient. So even the central government does not see the money that the state government is. So the autonomy of the states is preserved, that the money is coming directly to them. And only the challan, which is the information about the payment, comes into the network. So it's really a data pass through. And when the data flows through GSTN, it goes to the respective state for that state's transactions and goes to the center.
Right.
So it's just a pass through. But when there is that pass through, it creates the transactional data of 8 million businesses. And that has two aspects to it. One is the macroeconomic aspect, which is that you will have a real-time information system on the state of the economy.
Right.
So today we wait for some CSO, some survey.
And there's always some doubt on the IIP.
2 months later, 1 year later, all that will go away. On a real-time basis, the government will be able to publish the economic performance of the country on a, maybe at least once a month, and then ultimately it will be even shorter periods. So imagine that on a real-time basis, you'll know exactly, and you'll know how the economy is moving. For example, if the total volume of business on GST is X in June, and it's X plus delta X in July, you know that the economy. So that way, I think, then also it will give you regional things, right? You'll know actually which region, you'll know what is selling in which region and all that. So there's a massive amount of macroeconomic or aggregate economic data which is going to be a byproduct of that, which the government obviously appropriately, and there's no privacy there, that's aggregate data. So that I think is a big thing, and so we'll go to real-time economic monitoring, which no country really has the way India will have. The second benefit of this is that 8 million businesses which are filing returns at an invoice and line item level with GST will be able to get credit. So suddenly 8 million businesses, many of them small businesses, can now ask GST to give their data, their own data, not somebody else's, their own data, and they can share that with the lender. And the lender knows that this is certified by GST, that these people have paid taxes on these invoices. So it's real data. And based on that, they will get credit. So suddenly there'll be a massive growth in credit for India's small businesses.
Right.
And that is going to lead to economic growth.
Right. Also, sir, in terms of the opportunities that this will have on the jobs front, I mean, are people really overestimating? Because, ultimately in the near term, maybe people need, a lot of experts to help them navigate, but this is a technology platform. So do you think it will really have a big impact on jobs? And what kind of opportunities does this also open up for, startups? Because there are some 34 GST Suvidha providers like your ClearTax and others working with GST. So the opportunity for startups and, on the jobs front.
Yeah, actually there are three parts to this. The entrepreneurial ecosystem, the jobs in the direct GST and the indirect. So I'll talk about all indirect job creation. So clearly the way the GSTN has been designed, it's a very good design because the backbone is provided by GSTN. And there's all these GST Suvidha providers who can build on top of that, so they can innovate and they can compete and make better and better interfaces. And they can go out there and offer that. So that's a good thing. So you're seeing many people do that. And it also means that it means more and more small business will implement accounting systems like Tally or Zoho or whatever, so many, Oracle or whatever, and automatically create the electronic feed on the whole taxes. So the whole thing can be automated, right? So that's all going to happen. So that's innovation. Also, there's going to be a huge opportunity for people who will help the small businesses in preparing the tax returns. Because since ultimately the tax return has to come digitally to GSTN, and small businesses may not be that digitally savvy, you'll have lots of work opportunity for CAs and others who will actually set up businesses now to assist small businesses in filing the returns. So there's both an entrepreneurial opportunity and a job creation opportunity. But there's another indirect one, which is that 8 million businesses, as I explained, will now have access to the formal economy for loans. Because today, Indians' loans don't go to small businesses. They only go to some big guys who don't pay. And that's what is the whole story.
No,
right?
but people say India is driven by the shadow economy, so will it
No. You see, we have a system where the formal economy has biased itself to giving loans to big guys, which leads to all this house of debt and all this crony capitalism and all that. And the small businesses are not getting money from the formal economy. They are getting it from either family
or money lenders
or from earnings. So they're actually cramped for capital. The reason for that is that there's no data on their business performance. And it's very expensive for a large bank to go and find some small retailer in Daryaganj and give him a loan. But now with data, those guys will be able to tell a lender, look, see, this is my record. I earned 50 lakhs last month, and these are the invoices. And this has been certified by GSTN. Suddenly the data trust level will go up, the transaction granular will go up, and he'll start getting loans. So increasingly, this will lead to the democratization of credit to millions of small businesses. Now, what will happen there is if we have 60 million small businesses, and let's say we have 10 million businesses with 3 employees, once they get credit, they can expand. So they will hire one more guy.
So that's the indirect.
Yeah, so if 10 million businesses go from 3 employees to 5 employees, it's 20 million jobs. So they're all sophisticated after effects of this which are going to start being seen.
Right. Lot of myths around GST doing the rounds online, which Haspoka they even tried to bust. But if you have to sort of bust 2-3 myths about GST, what would it be?
I mean, I don't follow this Twitter stuff, but no, I think it's a simple system. While I agree that having multiple rates can bring in some complexity in the beginning. I think it's a simple system, and it's a well-designed system. It's a remarkable achievement for India's political system to put aside the differences and make it work. As I explained, the Empowered Committee has had 5 or 6 different leaders from different parties. So Mr. Asim Dasgupta was from the CPM,
right.
Mr. Sushil Modi was from the BJP, Mr. K.M. Mani was from the Kerala Congress, that Abdul Rathar or whatever was from the National Conference, Manish Sisodia from AAP, and now Amit Mitra from Trinamool. It's amazing that every one of them is from a different political party. So the fact that with all this and with 2 governments and making all this work, we should celebrate.
Coming to the final part of the interview, sir, you also launched a new fund this week, Fundamentum. Your debut as a venture capitalist, so to speak. But is it a good time to be a venture capitalist? A lot of, muck being thrown VC's way in India and the US. How are you going to be different?
No, I'm not looking at all that. I'm coming, or Sanjeev and I are coming from the point of view, is how do we build companies to last? Because we come from a generation which saw companies built over 20, 30 years. I was a part of Infosys. He was a part of Daksh, which was then sold to IBM. And we have seen, great companies emerge: Airtel, Vodafone, not Airtel, Kotak Bank, HDFC Bank, or Lupin Labs, or Sun Pharma, or Dr. Reddy's. They're all examples of entrepreneurs who stuck to it for 20, 30 years and scaled up. So we want to bring that kind of thinking to the startup world, because I have dabbled in startup investments. So I have
You've done about a dozen.
Yeah, and I have a fairly good idea how it works. And we need to identify in that startup world those entrepreneurs who want to run the marathon, those who want to build institutions to leave a legacy behind, and work with them, because building and scaling a company at speed, scale, and sustainability is also a complex exercise. You need to understand. Obviously, there has to be a business model, there has to be a product market fit, but you need leaders who scale, you need good HR practices, you need a good culture, which is what you are referring to. You need good strategy, you need good, everything has to be scaled. You need good finances, it's all operational stuff. It's nothing.
So with your and Sanjeev background, would it be fair to assume that perhaps there will be a bias towards services, towards IT services, or?
No, we're looking at domestic consumer businesses and globally focused next generation SaaS kind of companies. So
by when can we expect the first investment?
I think in the next few months. The team has come together. We already raised half the capital, and he and I ourselves have put in a third of the capital. And we're getting a lot of interest after this announcement. So people are coming forward because they want to be part of this. Because this is a fund for entrepreneurs by entrepreneurs. So all the investors also people who have some business experience, who run businesses of some kind. So they're also going to be advisors to these companies. So it's also a way of giving back. So somebody who is investing $10 million and has built 30 years building his company will now become a mentor to one of these new guys. So it's also a way of giving back. And we have, and neither Sanjeev nor I are taking any fees for this.
Yeah. Why that decision? I mean,
because
it is a commercial.
Yeah, but we want to be aligned on the incentives with the other investors. So our capital and somebody else's capital should get the same treatment. It's a philosophy.
Thank you so much for talking to us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Find us on Facebook at facebook.com/etnow and don't forget to click the like button. You can also follow us on Twitter at etnowlive. To stay updated with all our programming, hit the subscribe button on our YouTube channel by logging on to youtube.com/etnow.